my body wasn't mine anymore. It kind of felt like it belonged to the government and it wasn't mine.
Welcome back to the Uncovery podcast for this week. Before we dive into the mind-blowing conversation that I'm about to share with you, I'll do a little check-in on things that I've kind of been thinking about that are going on with me. I can't believe how fast this year is going by already. I know everybody says that every single year, but we're already in March. It's starting to get lighter out. Things feel like they're starting to open up. Not just, because it's spring coming, but also because COVID, knock on wood, find some wood, knock on it, seems to be lifting. Restrictions are lifting, things are opening up, people are doing more stuff. And I think that's going to be really, really positive. It feels like there's an incredible shift just happening for so many people. But that said, I'm also feeling extremely conflicted about it personally. Because I want that, but also I feel like I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready to reemerge until I'm recovered, if that makes sense. Winter and sort of hibernating feels like this great opportunity to do so much of this recovery work that I've been doing. And I'm struggling to be like, well, things can't open yet because I'm not ready. I'm not fixed yet. But that, it doesn't make sense. It's not a rational thought. It's driving me forward though, because I want to be more out in the world. I want to be healed. I want to move on. I want all of these things. And so it's keeping me in the game. But like I said, it is sort of this, it's a really weird conflicted feeling of things being brighter and more open and getting out of this pattern and getting out of my own patterns at the same time. So that's kind of one thing I've been thinking about a little bit. And then the other is I can feel for myself that my body is starting to change. Now, I still have work to do, certainly, in this regard, but I feel it sort of just intrinsically, like myself internally. And I'm noticing that it's not as uncomfortable as when I've gained weight in the past in recovery, because I am much more in the mental place of being like, this is inevitable. You are going to do this. It's important. It's good. It's positive movement. At least sometimes I'm feeling that way for the most part. Or at least I'm just saying it to myself over and over and over again until I really, truly believe and embody it. And I'm thinking about the fact that my mental state has influenced the way that my physical changes will end up impacting me, hopefully because I've done so much mental work and I'm so ready for this change that it will mean that it's less painful than it could be to just continue to put on the weight until I'm where I need to be. But then at the same time, your mental state also has to catch up with your physical body until you feel fully recovered. So usually, right, you put on the weight, your body starts changing before your mind and your mental neural pathways have had time to really catch up and feel free. But because I felt more mentally prepared to actually make change, it's sort of this flip-flop. So my mental state changed enough to get me to the point where the physical changes are hopefully going to continue to be less devastating than maybe they would have been at previous points in my recovery. But then my brain will still need to catch up to really feel fully recovered and in a new habit and in a new pattern. So it's this weird body and mind collaboration or conflict that I'm sort of going through and that I'm reflecting on, and I just got to keep going, and I'm still doing it. I'm still here. I'm not hibernating because I'm hiding. I'm hibernating because I'm freaking doing the work. And it's taxing and it's consuming and it's exhausting a lot of the time. Like I'm very, very tired, especially after I eat. I am finding myself exhausted a lot of the time, which is forcing me to rest, which is sort of a good thing for me too, because that's a whole nother part of that sort of hyper productive movement, all of that piece of the eating disorder for me as well. So yeah, things they are a changing bit by bit, and that's the latest update from my end of things. The conversation that you're about to hear now is with a really incredible young lady by the name of Abby Cook, who is formerly incarcerated individual who has an eating disorder and is in recovery from an eating disorder. Now, I had no idea the disproportionately common occurrence of eating disorders in incarcerated individuals. And so this was a conversation I did not expect to have necessarily on the podcast, but I got connected with Abby and it's absolutely fascinating. Her story is mind-blowing. I learned a lot, not just about eating disorders in the prison system, but the prison system in general, and the things that come along with that. So I think you are in for a mind-blowing experience listening to this episode and will probably learn as much as I did. Okay. Abigail Cook is a formerly incarcerated leader and student in Atlanta, Georgia. Since her release in March 2020, she has worked on 3 legislative campaigns for RestoreHER and the Georgia Coalition for Higher Education in Prison. She has been published by Tufts University as a poet and sculptor out of 800 national submissions, published by Miss Magazine discussing the Women's Care Act, and has been invited to speak at conferences and classes across the state of Georgia. She's receiving 2 bachelors in arts and film with a minor in criminology at Georgia State University, where she also secured a letter of support from administration for her Beyond the Box campaign. Abigail seeks to inspire meaningful conversations through art and education. Okay, so without further ado, Abby Cook. Abby Cook, welcome to the Uncovery podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're having. Your story and your experience, and I think your perspective is going to be incredibly, incredibly unique to share with people. So I just want to get right to it. Maybe to start out, maybe you could tell me just a little bit about you, what you do, and what do you exist to do? What's your mission?
Right. So currently I'm an art and a film student with a minor in criminology at Georgia State University. I think my overall mission in life is really just education, not in the traditional teaching sense, but I want to change how people view people who are different from themselves. That would be my number one goal. I think I would, die a happy woman if that was accomplished.
So tell me a little bit about how you got to where you are. You mentioned criminology. You have a really, really unique story. And so, yeah, tell me a little bit about what brought you to where you are and what you're doing right now.
Of course. So it all started when I was 17 years old. I was driving a car and my friend had exited the vehicle while we were driving. And unfortunately, after about 3 weeks in the hospital, she passed away. So I was charged with vehicular homicide in my state, even though I was a minor and everyone else in the vehicle everyone else was an adult. I was responsible for everyone in the car. So I was charged with vehicular homicide. I spent 16 months on house arrest. I spent 3 months incarcerated and am now serving a 10-year probation sentence. So after I was released, I was very quiet about everything that had happened. I didn't speak about it for about 2 years. I didn't tell a single soul. And then the BLM movement started happening. I felt really, really inspired that people were using their voice to enact really positive and beautiful change. So I wanted to do the same thing. And that's when I started working in advocacy in criminal legal reform. And I started working for an organization called RestoreHER that helps for like currently and formerly incarcerated women. It helps incarcerated pregnant women and general. It addresses gender violence that occurs in the American prison system. And I already also started working with the Georgia Coalition for Higher Education in Prison, which helps people access their education while they're incarcerated and while they're re-entering society. And so I'm working on 3 legislative campaigns right now, just trying to make America a better place.
Wow. What an incredible, and I'm sure really, really traumatic experience to go through all of that, because I think that the listeners of this particular podcast will be maybe less familiar with prison and reform and things like that. Could you talk a little bit about the experience in terms of the judicial process? How long were things like your trial, the sort of details about that overall experience?
I was arrested in July 2018 and I was not sentenced until November 2019. The courts are generally very backed up, especially in America and especially in conservative counties when we experience things like over policing. So I remember my first time in court, the prosecutor asked for a continuance, which essentially means she needs 45 more days to collect evidence, to interview people, to do whatever. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll be sentenced in 45 days. I'll like, get on with my life. I'll start figuring things out. She did this 12 more times. So,
and
yeah.
are you held in jail that entire time or in prison? I think I know the difference, but everybody might not.
I'm on house arrest during this time, which basically means I can't leave my house unless I'm going to school or the doctor. I was extremely lucky to be given the chance to be on house arrest for prison and jail. So you go to jail usually for pretrial detention, which means you've been charged but you're not convicted, or you go for holding for probation violations, or, which is less likely, you go if you're sentenced to serve time for a misdemeanor. Prison, you go if you've been convicted and are serving time for a felony.
Okay. And then that eventually was the case for you when you were
when I was
sentenced.
When I was sentenced and convicted, I was actually sentenced to jail time for the misdemeanors. So that's why I went to a county jail instead of a prison. And I was sentenced to probation for the felony.
Okay. Got it. Oh, wow. What a journey.
Yeah.
And you got out, you got out in March 2020, like at the beginning of the pandemic. Is that right?
Yeah. So I got out. The facility I was at was under a very strict lockdown and they didn't have TVs. I had to share a newspaper between like a dozen or 2 dozen women. So I just never read it because I never had the chance to. So I didn't
that's
really.
That's a lot of people having to share one newspaper.
Yeah,
there's obviously insane. No social media to scroll through.
Yeah, so I didn't really know what was going on. I just heard from my mom, like, yeah, I'm buying a lot of beans and toilet paper. And I was like, why? Like, I was so confused. So yeah, and then I get out and like some people are wearing masks and it's like this whole ordeal. And I was like very confused. And yeah, it was insane. And it was crazy because I had just spent like a year and a half on house arrest, another 3 months incarcerated, and I wanted to get on with my life. But now it felt like the whole world was on house arrest.
Right. Literally. Yeah. Like every single person is doing, and you're like, well,
yeah. And
I'm like, probably okay, well equipped to cope with this. Did you feel well equipped to cope with it?
Yeah, like I was seeing tweets like people like, I'm going crazy, and I was like, man,
you're like this is nothing.
Yeah, I was like, I feel bad, but like I just came from a situation where like I was being starved. I was, the shower water was making my skin break out. I had to pay $5 every time I wanted to talk to my mom. Like I was like, I can sit in my home and with my cat and with food and TV and be perfectly fine because it's way better than my, previous alternative.
It must have been really frustrating to have people equate their like cushy lockdown work from home experiences as being like being in jail. Yeah. Did you find that incredibly frustrating?
I did because there were a lot of like celebrities as well that were doing that and like other people who were like, oh, I feel like I'm in jail. And I was like, And part of me is like, I understand, like, we're, as a society, we're very hyperbolic. So I was kind of like, okay, yeah, I get it. But then having come from that situation, like when I was incarcerated, I got out and I went to the doctor and found out I had tuberculosis, that I had caught it while I was incarcerated. So while I was scared of getting this really respiratory intensive, coronavirus, I was living with this respiratory intensive tuberculosis in my body. So I was like, I could die. While I was incarcerated, there was just like people were being beaten, like there was police brutality. It was absolutely insane. And then someone, kind of had the nerve to be like, oh my gosh, like we didn't even have windows either. So that was the thing. So it was just a whole bunch of stuff. I get people are like exaggerate a lot, but I think it's important as we just kind of recognize when to be grateful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you mentioned is educating and being like people that have different perspectives from you, and maybe take those into consideration before you equate ordering takeout into your apartment to being in jail. But you mentioned, and obviously this is an eating disorder recovery podcast. People are like, what are we talking about? But you mentioned being starved, and maybe we can back up a little bit to the beginning of a little bit about your journey with eating disorders, because I understand that you're in recovery from an eating disorder, and that jail and prison and that entire process had a huge impact on that and some things that you saw. So yeah, maybe you can tell me about that.
Of course. Yeah, so I guess the very beginning is me. I have an identical twin sister and we are just like very skinny, like just naturally. I don't know why we our entire lives we've just been kind of like normal weight, but like closer to underweight. And so we got a lot of comments about that. And sometimes people were like, you guys should be models. And then other times people were like, you need to eat more. But I wasn't too worried about it because, like I said before, especially in America, our society values skinny bodies the same way they value middle class bodies or educated bodies. So I never worried about it. And then when I was 17, I was strip searched by a group of adult officers in a cell. And this kind of ruined me for a little bit because it was basically the strip search. You have to take your clothes off piece by piece. And it's just these people, these strangers, these adults staring at me like I'm still a child. But because I was charged as an adult, I was treated as an adult, but I was still a minor.
Yeah.
So I was taking all my clothes off piece by piece and I was begging them. I was saying, please, I was down to my bra, my underwear. Please don't make me do this. I'm in high school. I'm 17, like, please. And then they didn't say a word. They just held out their hand and I had to take all my clothes off, spin around, bend over, do the whole, strip search hoopla. And I hated my body after that. I hated looking at it. I didn't like that other people could look at my body. I didn't like that my body wasn't mine anymore. As it kind of felt like it belonged to the government and it wasn't mine. So I wore baggy clothes for 2 years, like insanely baggy clothes too. Now, my mom used to tell me that I looked like a Run DMC member because I didn't want anyone to be able to see my body. Yeah, it was bad. And then, like I said, baggy clothes then became a trend and people are like, oh my gosh, like you kind of like you're a trendsetter. And I was like, no, I'm traumatized.
No, it's actually like a body issue because I've been violated in this way. And like we see that commonly, I think, with certain people with eating disorders in general and body dysmorphia is this, I need to cover up, and these insane baggy clothes and things like that. Okay.
So it was pretty brutal. But while I was on house arrest and wearing all these baggy clothes, I started to heal a little bit mentally. So the first 9 months of house arrest, I kid you not, I did not get out of bed unless I was going to school. My grades were really bad. I was crying a lot. It was really messy, but I begun to heal and I started, eating regularly again and sleeping regularly again. And before I was incarcerated, I weighed myself and I realized I gained like 10 pounds and I didn't know where that had come from. And when I was like moving my body from side to side, I could like kind of feel it on my hips and it felt like strange to me. And then I started thinking, do I like how I look? Am I comfortable like this? And I was kind of freaking out. And then I was sentenced to jail time. And I had a month before I had to turn myself in, and I was eating the same, but all I could think was jail is gonna suck, but on the bright side, and this is probably the worst thing I've ever thought, I know when I get out of jail I'm gonna be really skinny because there's just not food there. So that was like all I was looking forward to in jail. I mean, like, I was gonna miss my family. I had to spend my birthday and Christmas and New Year's and Valentine's and all that stuff. But I was thinking like I'll get out and I'll be skinny again. And maybe that'll make it like almost worth it in a way, which is like, and that's when I knew I was really in deep with the body image issues, because what person thinks that? Like,
Right.
it was insane.
Those are the things that, this comes up on the podcast. And because I sort of share a lot about, what my brain does or what my brain says in these moments. And I cringe when I say them out loud that my brain has ever thought these things. But it surprises me 0% that your brain would do that, because I can hear my own brain. If that were to be, me in the depths of my eating disorder, knowing that was going to happen, it was like, oh, well, this is going to be terrible. But at least the silver lining is I'll come out of jail skinnier. And there's an element, I feel, probably of this mental coping mechanism that you're doing, because what's in front of you at that point is unimaginable for a 17-year-old who's already been through the trauma of what you had been through with your friend and everything leading up to that point. So it's like your brain is grasping onto this one thing that you can possibly attach to. And then given the impact that strip search and everything that followed had on your body image, it actually isn't that outrageous to think that that's what your brain would think. So yeah, that's it. It always sounds like, oh my God, I can't believe that I think this. But really, if you unpack it, it's like, well, yeah, it kind of makes sense. Okay. So that month leading up, this was your thought, this was your silver lining of going to jail. And then what? And then what happened?
So I was incarcerated. They took my weight before I went in, and it was like a normal, healthy weight for someone of my height. I'm 5'10", but I was still a little bit like, okay, that'll go away at some point. So I get in and I find out there's something common in jails and prisons, and it's called commissary. So or store. It's either called commissary or store, and it's basically you can order noodles or candy or soda or like pretty much like granola bars, and that can supplement the meals they give you. The average meal in prison or jail costs about $1 because they have to feed thousands of people.
Right. Yeah. What are they? Can you just, give a little bit of color to, like, I have absolutely no idea what the realities of that would look like. And I bet lots of people wouldn't. So could you give me a few examples of what an actual prison meal would have looked like?
Yeah. So there's most things on the menu are like the name of a food and then the word surprise. So rice surprise, potato surprise, miserable. The surprise
is that real? That actually sounds like something they would make up on TV or in a show and be like that sounds like it's a prison show joke.
It does. And I thought people were kidding, but that's what the officers called it too. I was like, oh man, get me out of here. And the surprise was usually like weird pieces of meat or that it was inedible. Like, surprise, you can't eat this, Yeah. So it was, and then they would give us these little pieces of, they're like kind of like cake, but if you broke it in half, there were pockets of cornstarch and flour. So it was hard to eat because you were basically just eating like flour,
like raw powder that wasn't mixed into whatever it was, and that just they baked, and then it's like a mouthful of powder.
Yeah. Yep. Ugh. So it was just hard to eat. And then we got canned fruits and vegetables, I ate a lot of those. I think the thing that I ate the most, they had chicken patties, and no hate to Chick-fil-A, but these chicken patties were like so good. It might have been just because it was the only thing that I ate, but it was insane. And I remember one night I accidentally got two on my tray and I ate both of them in one sitting, and I got so sick because my body hadn't had that much food in so long. I got so sick I had to lay down and take off all my clothes, and I was spinning. I was absolutely spinning. So my body was like, where did you get this food from? Like, how are you eating so much? Like, it was just this trip.
I also don't want to know what was in those chicken patties that would chemically have that kind of impact on you if you just happen to eat two instead of one, but
Yeah,
also a real indication of the state your body was in those other regular meals,
yeah,
right? Okay,
yeah,
so you have your 3 meals that they give you, and then you can go to a commissary or a store thing
yeah.
and
But
buy extras.
yeah, but the thing with our commissary is that the warden of the facility shut it down. So we didn't have access to any of the food. You could buy like
Wow.
Kool-Aid packets, but the funny thing about they gave us little juice packets on our trays, and I can't remember the name exactly of the ingredient, but when my mom and I looked it up, it was an appetite suppressant. So they were giving us appetite suppressants so that we weren't as hungry. And when I found this out, I used to rip the top off the package and eat them raw. Because you're supposed to mix them with water, but I was just eating them in their powdered form because I didn't want to be hungry anymore. I was so sick of like hearing my stomach grumble. Every time I stood up, I was dizzy. I could not stand without almost falling over. So I was just so sick of it. So I was just eating those.
So that
Um,
you wouldn't feel that intense hunger, which is so interesting because at that point, then you're not even restricting on purpose. You're not
no,
trying to deprive yourself of food and then trying to suppress your appetite with this appetite suppressant. You are literally being starved.
yeah. And it got to the point where I was dreaming about food and I was like, this isn't worth it anymore. I don't want to be skinny. I want to be fed. The weird thing is like I couldn't really see how skinny I was getting, but everyone else could compared to when I went in and months later. And I remember I had lifted up my shirt a little bit and I was like looking in the mirror and I was like, am I bloated? Like, you know how every woman has their little pouch that protects the uterus. I think
Mm-hmm,
that's what it's.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I was looking at that and I was like, not really aware of why it was there. And I was like, man, this is still here. Boo. And my bunkie ecstasy walked up to me and was like, do you have body dysmorphia?
Wow. It's almost like an induced eating disorder in an already somewhat vulnerable person that you were coming into that. These sort of like body image issues were percolating. They were kind of like beneath the surface in some regard. And then being incarcerated was as if an eating disorder was thrust upon you without you engaging in it consciously, and then that continues to mess with this already sort of started body dysmorphia and things like that. Were you noticing similar things or similar behaviors in prison and jail when with other people, with other inmates?
Yeah. So one study in England found that eating disorders are twice as common in the carceral setting than they are in the general, public. So I did see one woman told me she was fasting for religious reasons. And I was like, okay, cool. And so she wouldn't eat anything except for a little like side of pineapple or fruit or whatever, like little side dish of vegetables came on the tray that day. She would only eat that once every day for a week. So she was, essentially not eating. That's like maybe 50, 100 calories a day. So she does this probably once a month or every other week for a while, and we sleep next to each other in our dorm. And one day I'm talking to her about it, like asking more questions, and she's like, honestly, I'm not doing this for religious reasons. I just want to be skinny again. So she was absolutely starving herself, and I had never seen anything like that, but it was a common thing among women in prison or jail to want to lose weight because part of what they feed you. So when you're in jail or prison, the average amount of bread you will get each week is like 2.5 loaves. So you get like this insane amount of bread. And when you're hungry, that's all you eat. So you eat it and you eat it, you eat it. And then you fall victim to chronic illnesses and diabetes and hypertension. And then a lot of women will look in the mirror one day after having, consumed the bread and the high sugar food that they give you. And they're like, man, like, how did this come to this? And because they don't have psychiatric or psychological help behind bars, and because they don't have the biggest control over what they eat,
Right.
it's half controlled by someone else. It just becomes this thing where it's like, okay, now I'm gonna, take control back and I'm going to figure this out myself. And I saw that thought process occur among many women, and some of them vocalized it, and some of them you could just see by the way that they were, treating the food on their plate.
And I mean, you can imagine with what we know, with what we know about eating disorders and control and anxiety and lack of control, there's probably nowhere else on the planet outside of being incarcerated where you would feel less in control of your own life and your own self. Everything is controlled for you. So if there's only one thing you can control, it's like the amount, I guess, of the food that they even give you, how much you choose to eat or not eat, or how to, play with it or whatever it is. That's the only thing. Your life is completely controlled outside of that.
Exactly. And that's one of the biggest punishments. A lot of people think it's loss of freedom, but it's actually loss of autonomy. So I couldn't, do anything for myself. If I had a question, I had to call my mom and have her Google search it. Just little things like that.
And I mean, and everything that you would have in your outside life that you would take for granted, that is so simple every single day, would be completely taken away from you. Everything that anybody should be very, very grateful for is just not there. Wow. Was there any support internally? Like, what, in terms of how you recognized your own struggle? How did that kind of continue? And then, did you get any resources?
So when you're incarcerated, at least at my facility, there were 2 therapists or counselors between 1,400 people. And it took a month to see them, and you only saw them for 5 minutes. So my last visit with this counselor woman, she noticed that I had lost a lot of weight at that point, and she was like, they need to start giving you Ensure, which is those little milk thingies at the end of the day, so that you're getting more food. I'm like actually very concerned for you and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And
what was your feeling about that when she said that to you? Where was your head at that point? Because they do that for eating disorder patients that are inpatient. They basically force feed them Ensure.
So any excuse to get food at that point, I was on board, and anything to help me gain the weight is fine. And she told the officers that I needed Ensure. I told the officers that I needed Ensure, and they never gave it to me. And I had about 3 weeks left. So I kept just losing weight. And so I got out, and the first thing I did was go to McDonald's and eat. And again, it was like the amount of food was a shock to my system. I felt really, really sick, and I kept feeling kind of sick when I ate food for a while because it wasn't like a regular thing in my life anymore.
Right.
But then I gained weight quickly.
I mean, that's not even that crazy, right? When you think about like the way that weight can fluctuate, and after coming out of literal starvation and beginning to basically refeed, it's so crazy that just your circumstance basically is like the eating disorder journey. like jail is just an eating disorder, is like it's wild. So you got out, and because you were feeding yourself again, your body was like, excellent, we're being fed. And so you gained weight more rapidly.
Yeah. So I started gaining more and more weight, and I went to the doctor. And that's when I found out I had tuberculosis. But when they weighed me, I was like at the line where I was like a normal weight again. And so I kept each week, I just would get on the scale, and I saw that I was gaining more weight, and it wasn't stopping. And I was getting really scared, and I started working out again, but I was also just eating so much. And so it just became really upsetting to me. So it's just like this whole thing for the longest time. And it was really sad because I remember one day just crying, thinking about like, I just want to not have this relationship with food anymore. Like I don't want to have to think about, can I eat this? How many calories is in this? Like I just want to be able to like eat just to eat, and
like a normal person. We just want to eat like a normal person. It's so taxing. It's so taxing. So did you at that point reach out for help when you knew that this was really, really detrimental?
So the whole eating thing got to the point where I'm actually having conversations with licensed professionals about it, because I was having really bad paranoia, really bad anxiety. So now I'm working extra hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh, and I mean, it's just astounding the way that like something that starts quite seemingly harmless in the background through that
Yeah.
experience of being incarcerated, how exacerbated every single interaction you have with your body is, and therefore with food as well. And we're, 2 years outside of your release by this point. So I'm in awe of what you have been through. I am impressed by the fact that you are now getting help, taking steps to recover, and that you're being public with your voice and your platform about just how messed up this is in the prison system, which until we got connected through a mutual friend, I had never, ever heard of or even thought to look at the occurrence of eating disorders in people that are incarcerated. And so I just don't think that anybody is talking about this. Like I say that about things like, oh, not enough people are talking about men's mental health. Not enough people are talking about this kind of eating disorder context. But literally nobody I have ever spoken to or heard from has ever mentioned what the incarcerated population goes through in terms of eating. So I just commend you for speaking out about it. It really, I think it matters a lot.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. And I totally agree. There's a lot of issues within the system that at the end of the day, mass incarceration affects probably the widest group of people, because it affects every religion, every race, all that kind of stuff. So pretty much every problem that affects the general population is going to affect someone who's incarcerated, and it could occur at a heightened rate. So it's just things like that we don't really consider, but are definitely happening.
Yeah. Well, your work is incredibly important. I'm really, really proud of you. You're also really young and already have, gone through an enormous, enormous amount. And so, I'm really proud of you. And I just want nothing but recovery and the best for you, and to use your platform to kind of speak about the things that you care about, I just think is so wonderful. So it's been such an honor to have you as a guest, and
Thank you so much.
I'm thrilled to see like where you go, where you take this, and what your work kind of looks like. Where can people find your work? Kind of follow along with the things that you're passionate about.
Right. So I'm on Instagram, and my website is abigailecook.com, and I post my art there and my photography and my activism.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here, Abby.
Thank you so much for having me.
interview. Okay, we'll talk to you soon.